Welcome to the Managing Violence podcast, where we talk all things self-defense, violence prevention, and aggression management. My name is Joe Saunders. I'm your host. Let's go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, for the final episode of Season 2. I know, cue the sad noises. That's okay, though. I'm going to have an announcement at the end of this episode to let you know when you can expect Season 3 and also a bit of a sneak peek as to what's coming up in Season 3. But in the meantime, we are going out with a bang in this season. So we have none other than the legend himself, Tony Blauer. Tony is the creator of the Spear system. He is the founder of Blauer Tactical Systems. And a lot of what we take for granted now in the self-defense industry originated with Tony Blauer, or at least he was one of the very first that was playing with these concepts as early as 1980. He was incorporating elements of behavioural, emotional, and psychological study into his physical self-defense, and really opened the door to a lot of ideas with scenario training. And I've often seen Tony as being one of the pioneers, along with Jeff Thompson. I see Jeff launching the UK scene, Tony really launching a lot of the North American scene. He's one of the first guys to really make a living teaching law enforcement and military on an ongoing basis, and still does it now after 40 years of study, which is pretty incredible. Not many people have the longevity of a Tony Blauer. And he's also still very generous with his time. Didn't hesitate to accept the invitation to be on this show, and was incredibly gracious to answer my questions. Nothing was off limits. Look, if you have questions for Tony, he has already agreed to come back and chat again in Season 3. So if you've got questions that you'd like to have answered by the man himself, by all means send them through, and I would love to put them to Tony in another episode. But in the meantime, this will be the final episode of the season. If you miss us terribly, please go check us out on social media. As I said last episode, during the break between seasons, I will be uploading content on YouTube, and some of that will be our old episodes. I'll be uploading those, but I'll also be putting up new content, new videos, some training materials. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Everywhere you go, we're there. Subscribe, follow, help us get our numbers up, and help spread the word. If you have enjoyed the last 2 seasons, please head over to patreon.com/managingviolence. If you can afford to throw a couple of bucks our way each month, it really helps to keep the show going, and helps me justify the time I put into these episodes each week. That's it for me. I'm not going to rant anymore. I want to get into Tony Blauer. Here he is. So this morning I'm joined by Tony Blauer. Tony, thank you so much for joining us. It's a tremendous honor to have you on the podcast. It's you've been probably one of our most requested guests since I started the show last year. Everyone's wanted me to get Tony Blauer, the legend, on the show, and here we are. So thank you for joining me.
Wow, I don't even know how to follow that up. Thanks, man. I appreciate
it. Tony, we're talking just briefly before we started recording about you're one of the first people to really pioneer what became the reality-based self-defense movement. One of the first to start incorporating scenario-based training. And you were doing that as early as, if I understand correctly, you started dabbling with that as early as the late 70s, early 80s. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually 1980 is when I did my first on-purpose, like quasi-organized scenario. So I've been, in the years before, I knew I was looking at something differently. I didn't know why. For example, I started doing Taekwondo when I was 13, 1973. I'd wrestled for years before that. I boxed in the 70s, and continued to do that for a long time. But I was obviously very influenced by, it was the Bruce Lee craze era. He had passed away in 73. And like many, many martial artists listening to this and people around the world, we all thought we were Bruce Lee's biggest fan, but really inspired. So I was always looking at stuff through kind of a street filter, through osmosis from reading about his stuff. But even to the point of I remember trying to break some boards just because, you're doing martial arts, doing Taekwondo. And I remember breaking some boards, but immediately my sense of what people now call reality based, which I always make fun of, and I don't mean to create more haters, but reality based self defense, really, I mean, what other type of self defense is there? Unreality based self defense, it doesn't need it just be self defense, but that's another tangent and rabbit hole we can get on later.
Yeah.
Right?
I've mentioned on the show several times. I hate that term, but I just can't think of what else to call it.
Yeah. How about self defense?
Yeah, I know, but then we get dragged into everything else that isn't self defense. But yeah, carry on with the story.
Yeah. So what's interesting is here I am busting some boards, and the guy that's holding them for me is one of my students, one of my first private students. And I said to him, this isn't realistic. He goes, well, you just like broke, 2 or 3 boards with a reverse punch. That's pretty realistic. I said, no, but like you're holding the boards for me. I'm breathing. I'm setting the distance. I'm not firing the punch until I'm ready. Like, how realistic is that? Like, is a bad guy going to come up to me in the street and stand in front of me and go, okay, I'm gonna rob you in a couple seconds. Get ready, take a deep breath, measure your reverse punch, try and punch me in the solar plexus. But if you have to, punch me in the throat because I got a gun. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so I start making fun, and he laughs. He says, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, how fast can you get your hands on the board and get it set up? So we rehearsed that a couple of times, and I turned my back. I said, I want you to shove me like as if I'd walked away from a fight, and you shoved me, and then you threatened me verbally, like, come on, you asshole, come on, you pussy. And I'm going to turn around. In that moment, I'm going to, just for the purpose of the scenario, I'm going to pretend that I can see you lining up to sucker punch me, and I'm going to just spin and turn and punch. And I don't know if you can visualize this because, of course, it's just audio, but where I'd broken the boards before, standing there like in a front stance, like every martial artist does, right? Get ready, go. And all I can hear is Bob Wall from Enter the Dragon, or not Bob Wall breaking the boards, and Bruce Lee from Enter the Dragon saying, boards don't hit back, right? And I'm going, right? Yeah. So this is like spinning through my head. So I turn my back to my student. He gives me a shove on the back and pushes me a couple of feet. And immediately he lurches back and grabs the boards and sets up. I turn, I look through my peripheral vision blind spot over my shoulder, and I see the target, and I turn and I whip a punch, and I fucking miss it and almost like hyperextend my elbow. Why? Because like, visualize this. Like, it's like you know, everybody listening here, if you ever hit a bag, you've miscued the distance, you've mistimed, miscalibrated the distance, and you throw a hard punch on a bag. It's got to be a linear punch, like a jab or a cross, or a kind of an elliptical hook punch, something not too, you're not digging body shots in, and you miss it and you hyperextend your elbow and it fucking kills. And so I did that, and I was like, damn, and I grabbed my elbow and I'm like, fuck. But I'm pissed because I know that what I'm trying to do is right. It's who cares how hard your punch is if the target's not moving? Who cares? It's like, why, if you look at statistically, I mean, my main business now, here we are decades later, I train military and law enforcement. Those are my main clients. And, it's interesting. A lot of the people that don't like what we do have never experienced real violence. They're martial artists who look at stuff through an unconscious bias. And that's an interesting discussion because it sounds like I'm hating on people, and I'm not. It's a frustrating thing for me of just, how do I make people safer? I don't care what martial art you study. There's a intersection between neuroscience and scenario training that most people will never experience, but it's the missing link in what you need to improve your perception speed and decrease your reaction time in a real violent encounter. And that's what we do with our training. It's the combination of startle flinch, how to replicate violence, understanding the physiological connection to your startle flinch and how to weaponize the startle flinch, and then how to look at that as a metaphoric biological airbag, and then recognizing that a sudden ambush is like a car accident, and what's going to save you in a car accident isn't your driving. Right? People think like your driving is metaphorically your skill set. Well, if you're in the accident, apparently your driving didn't fucking matter. right? Like I don't know if people get that. Like, it doesn't matter how good a driver you are. Somebody like drives through a light, or drunk driver, somebody texting hits you. At the moment of impact, if you're in a modern car, you need your airbag to deploy and create space and protection between you and the steering column or the windshield or what have you. And that's what the SPEAR system is about. And then the rest of my program is all about scenario design and how to do that, because the drills I was doing in the 80s are now substantiated by modern neuroscience, understanding neurotransmitter myelinization and all of that. And it's fantastic to kind of have that white paper research supporting what we do, which I only intuitively followed that path in the 80s when one of my students got his ass kicked in a real self-defense situation that I was training him for. But anyways, I went off on a crazy tangent there. It was fun. Hopefully everyone enjoyed that a little bit. But
feel free to do as many tangents as you like.
Thank you. But so what I ended up doing with the boards, just to finish that story, is when he shoved me, he changed everything about range. And so when I turned, my brain, there's no such thing as muscle memory, but what was starting from the neurotransmitter myelinization and that rep of how neuromuscular, how your brain communicates what you're going to do now. I threw the punch that I'd been practicing for years, but the target wasn't there. Right. And this people who don't understand this might be going, oh, that's stupid. He missed. And now he's giving it. Like, no, there's a fucking reason that you miss it. There's a reason why, like, cops qualify on the range, but don't shoot nearly as well during gunfights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so it's the same principle. Is when we allow, if you look at an MMA fighter or a boxer or anybody when they're warming up and hitting pads, nobody misses hitting pads, but they miss hitting bad guys or their opponent way more than they hit. And the reason for that isn't just because the other guy's moving. Part of it is how fear can hijack the prefrontal cortex. It changes how we think and process. Fear can impact your breathing systems, your emotional state. Are you breathing, you're still belly breathing, or now you're vertically breathing? Is that affecting the oxygenation in your blood? That's changing how you think. There's so many connected factors here, but the real one is that the brain learns by doing. And so our training is what's called in modern science, neuroscience learning, is called brain-based learning. Conventional learning that most people do all over the world, whether it's math or piano or martial arts, is block-based learning. You're going to do this for X amount of times, you can do this many reps, and then you get your next level, and you can do it. It's not contextual. And so there are some great instructors in jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and MMA and Thai boxing that get this and understand this, but most are. It's not that they're malicious. It's not that they're not smart. It's got nothing to do with that. It's they're teaching people what they were taught. It's just the way of the world. But there's a way that, and I encourage all your listeners, if they're interested in the subject, to read the book The Talent Code, where they, very in a layperson's way, explain the relationship between mastery and skill and neurotransmitter myelinization. There's a great story that I love to tell. I was working a military contract last year, and in the class was a guy who was a world-class jiu-jitsu guy. I've been doing jiu-jitsu maybe 20, 30 years. He's competed all over the world. He's a world champ. He trains people. And he was in the class. He wasn't part of this military group, but he was one of the adjunct trainers for their ground fighting. And they asked me if he could come in and attend. And I said, well, I'd rather he didn't, because he doesn't know our philosophy. And he goes, look, he's a good guy, and we want him to see this because he helps us. And sometimes blah. I said, okay. So at the end of the week, we do these scenario training drills. And in this particular scenario training, they built up these evolutions. So we've been building, based on neuroscience, pre-contact cues that trigger a response from the defender where there's a conversion between the startle flinch, converting the flinch, and then moving tactically. We call that primal protective tactical. Primal is what your body wants to do prior to any training. Protective is when you're caught in between, like you're going, holy shit, and your hands are coming out to push away danger. And then tactical is when you've got time and space to move and you've converted, and now you're moving right into the threat, and your brain is locked in. So one of our mottos or maxims is, until you're emotionally and psychologically in control of yourself and physically dominating your opponent, don't transition to a complex motor skill. This is the biggest mistake people make, and it's why people lose street fights. It's why people lose violent encounters. It's why cops and military lose close quarter fights. It's because the training is block based. So someone grabs your gun, you go, okay, I'm supposed to pin the hand, I'm supposed to then do this disarm, and the brain starts to download, that file. It doesn't take into account the scenario. So for example, if there's multiple assailants and your SOP is always to take somebody to the ground because the guy running your defensive tactics combatives program is a huge ground fighting proponent, your situational awareness is compromised by the sudden violence. But then your brain in that emotional moment downloads what you were taught to do. And now suddenly you go to the ground, you take the guy ground. But if you had 2 or 3 opponents around you, that might not be the smartest place to be, right? And so there's this whole connection in scenario-based training that I try to tell people. I explain to them, hey, sudden violence doesn't care what martial art you study. Sudden violence and science don't care about your martial art. So there's a moment before we decide, should I take this guy down? Should I take out my pistol? Should I headbutt this guy? Should I eye gouge him? Should I play dead here? All of these have to run through what I call choose safety filter. And the choose safety filter, not to be confused by playing it safe, the choose safety filter is this mindset of, what is the safest thing I could do here? Now, that word, I deliberately use words that are provocative in classes. Remember, most of my classes are filled with type A, friggin', hard chargers. So when I use something that sounds like little psychobabble, touchy-feely, like, let's choose safety here, they're like, what the fuck? And I go, what is the safest thing you can do here? What is the safest thing you could do here? And the safest thing might be to charge the threat and risk your life, right? So you're in an active shooter situation, you're pinned down under a desk, and now this guy's going around and he's shooting at people hiding under the desk. The safest thing to do there is not to stay under the desk. It's to pick up your desk and a chair and whip it at the person and try to make them flinch and miss and charge the threat, right? And I'm not, hey, that wasn't advice for anybody. The scenario dictates. But what I'm saying is, before we go, I'm going to do this next, we run it through this. Is this really the safest thing to do here? I'm talking about, personal safety and strategic and tactical choices. But, and I spit out a ton of stuff there, but to finish the story, I'm on this military base, it comes trying the scenarios we've built up, and I want everyone listening to understand that the patterns that we were practicing, and I use the word pattern on purpose because your brain looks for patterns. Your mind, your eye, and your brain, how they communicate, are looking for patterns. And so we had done all of our spear flow, the weaponization of the startle flinch, the learning how to weaponize the forearm, and so on and so forth. And now what they were doing is a long gun muzzle strike into a padded assailant who's obviously wearing my high gear suit, not one of the copies. And the role player takes the muzzle strike in the chest, feigns the response, falls back against the wall, and then the operator moving in on him is going to sling the weapon and go reach out with his support hand to grab him, because his goal is to flex tie him. In that moment, the role player is going to shoot in with a gross motor tackle, and I say gross motor because it's got to be what I call a shitty tackle, not a technical tackle. And that's like, these are little mistakes people make during scenario training. They allow their sport technique to be in there. And if you study real violence from dashboard video, body cam, CCTV, iPhone capture, you don't see good technique. I mean, I always tell people that's the litmus test for whether what you're practicing is efficient or not. If we don't see it during real violence, then it's probably not happening or not that reliable. And if you look at, and we do this all the time as part of our research, we've looked at thousands and thousands of, again, my main clients, of course, are people who are operational, who are actually moving towards the danger on purpose. And you don't see, technique. You don't see good kicks and good punches and good jiu-jitsu. Now, Everyone who's listening to your podcast who loves jujitsu is like, as their their eyes just lit up and their arms are up in the air going, what's he talking about? Listen, there are two factors when you're evaluating efficacy of something. One is, who's the bad guy? Is he really trying to kill the cop, or is he just trying to get away and he's not really that dangerous? Because then anything can work, right? So that's one factor. The other thing is, did the bad guy, we call him a 3%er. This is what we call the 97-3 rule. 97% of the people you meet are going to, you're going to figure it out through whatever training you have. But there are 3%ers. These are asocial predators that are willing to injure or kill you to facilitate their escape. And whenever, if you talk to somebody who's really met one of those guys, they'll tell you, yeah, nothing was working until I did this. Like, it wasn't like a technique moment. It's the scariest, shitty moment like that you can remember. So a lot of people send me videos of fights and they go, hey, check this out. And they're not fights, they're douchebag fights, meaning they're fights online where legally and morally and ethically they didn't have to happen and they shouldn't have happened. So when I study stuff, I'm only really looking at true violence, home invasion, carjacking, dragging someone to secondary crime, somebody jumping on a cop inside the reactionary gap and really trying to go for his gun or take him out or what have you. So anyways, just in case you haven't figured this out yet, everybody listening, I'm a stream of consciousness instructor. I go off on these crazy tangents. Somehow I remember the key story that I was talking. So here we are back at this military compound. We're at the fifth day, Friday in this training, muzzle strike to the sternum. Role player goes back, feigns that he's injured, clutches his chest. Operator goes to transition is long gone out of the way, and then go to secure the guy to drag him to the ground to put his flex ties on. And in that moment, the role player recovers and charges the threat. And that's where the startle flinch deploys. Visualize it like an airbag in an accident. You thought everything was okay. You were switching lanes, boom, and all of a sudden something happens. Airbag deploys, and in that moment, they're supposed to weaponize the startle flinch, so the arm comes out, finger splayed outside 90, forearm hits. It's like a tactical windshield wiper. You're pushing against this sudden storm. And it's in that moment when you're pushing away the danger that you start where your reptilian brain and your cognitive brain go, oh, fuck, this works. Okay, good. Now you start to threat discriminate. Okay, what's he open for? Is it a knee? Is it an elbow? Am I going to throw him to the ground? Am I going to jump on his back? Who's around me? There's like this nano moment between stimulus responses, gap time, and that's where you're taking a look. And self-awareness and situational awareness needs a deeper dissection and excuse me, and discussion, because if you don't have good self-awareness, you're not going to have total situational awareness. Like if you don't realize you've got
absolutely.
Yeah. If you don't realize that you got a blind spot, like in an unconscious bias, like you think everybody can get dropped with your overhand right. If you think everybody can be taken to the ground and then choked out, like anatomically that can all happen, but in terms of the scenario, it might not be the safest thing to do, therefore not the smartest thing to do. So here, everyone's doing this exercise. And what happens is after the spear deploys, they're supposed to transition arms and then transition to their pistol, check for opposing threats, and then take care of the bad guy, whatever that means, and it's a very dynamic drill. Balance is being, challenged, proximity sense, a lot of thinking. And this is, if you read the talent code, we're talking about brain-based learning is teaching you to make decisions under duress. And the more you do that, the better your perception speed gets. And if your perception speed increases or improves, your reaction time decreases. You start making faster decisions that are more accurate. But it needs to be done in a live, dynamic way that's very controlled. So we're doing this, and now it's this guy's turn who's been doing jiu-jitsu for 30 years. He comes in, he does the muzzle strike fine. Role player goes back, he pops in, the guy shoots and he goes to tackle, and the guy immediately goes for a guillotine. He doesn't pull guard, right? He's standing on his feet, which is great because everyone's wearing kit. He does a guillotine for a second, then releases it, slips out around the head, goes into the spear tactic, and then transitions to his pistol. So I walk over to him, and I'm obviously not going to mention his name. He's quite famous. And I say, hey man, don't do the guillotine. When you're doing the guillotine, both hands come down. And here's the thing: is like you're in a CQB environment. There's other threats. If you got both hands on this guy's neck, you can't transition to a knife, to a gun. You can't strike somebody if multiple assailant. You can't get a hand up to protect. You don't want to get your hands tied up. He goes, yeah, okay, got it. So I said, okay, good. I walk away. And does that make sense to you, Joe, what I just explained?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, and look, there's so many parallels to situations I was into when I was working as a bouncer. I mean, I came into to bouncing predominantly as a judo guy and a jiu-jitsu guy, and even though after I got into scenario training fairly early after I started working in that environment, but even then there were times where under duress I defaulted back to going to the ground, and probably the worst situation I was ever involved in. I was dealing with a situation standing up. I got bottled, and as soon as I realized that I was actually in trouble, without even realizing, I took the guy to the ground, and then I was on the ground getting my head kicked in by 3 or 4 people. Right. And it's funny. Like even though with that scenario training and having all the knowledge, the muscle memory of under pressure, do this.
Well, that's great. That's great, because that will tie exactly into this and hopefully create a light bulb moment for all your listeners here. So let me hijack this back. But remember, everyone listening, remember what Joe just said, that he got bottled, and even though he knew this guy's got maybe like still a piece of glass in his hand that could sever your carotid, take your eye out, your default, and it wasn't muscle memory. There's no such thing as muscle memory, and I'll explain that in a second. But everyone calls it that, so don't feel bad. Everyone says muscle memory, but it's important. If we understand neuroscience in a better way, that means we understand how our brain works. It makes us safer. So here we are. This guy goes back. It's his next rep. Guess what he does? He does the guillotine again. So I say to one of my coaches, I said, go over and talk to him. And here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking he's slipping it in there to show everybody that you can put that jiu-jitsu could have been a move here, right? And so it's bugging me inside, because I'm trying, like, to me, it's challenging the authenticity or integrity of the drill, where I tried to explain, hey, listen, yeah, guillotine's great, but if you got another threat coming in from a door and you got both your hands tied up on his neck and you can't get to your firearm and you're locked in here and maybe predisposing yourself to go to the ground and pull guard, like you said in your fight, like you're on the ground controlling guy, you forget for a moment in that myopic blind rage moment, situational awareness is compromised. Oh shit, he's got 3 friends. They're wearing boots. I'm getting my head kicked in. So he does it. I turn to my assistant instructor. I go, hey dude, go talk to him. So I see him walk over and talk, and I see this jiu-jitsu guy nodding his head, but his body language is incongruous. I thought I was going to pick up some disdain or some, like some defiance, but he was like, really, his body language is like, yeah, okay, I get it. And he does it again. Next rep, same thing again, guillotine. And I'm like about to walk over, and then I realize this. I was still digesting the talent code book and the explanation of neurotransmitters and myelinization. So myelinization and myelin in the brain is metaphorically, it's almost like the black electrical tape that you would wrap like wires with to ensure the connectivity and integrity of that energy transfer, right? So if you got a wire that's a little bit old, or you just you cut it and you twisted it together with with another feed, you always wrap it in electrical tape to make sure it's protected and stays secure. Correct? You guys do that in Australia, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Provided that you actually paid someone professionally to do it. Yeah.
Right. So the myelin is a metaphor so the myelin sheath, what that does is every time you practice something, it's like you're wrapping electrical tape around that neurotransmitter. And that's what makes you faster and faster and faster. So one of our maxims is be careful what you practice. You might get really good at the wrong thing. And that's really misunderstood by a lot of people. Be careful what you practice. You might get good at the wrong thing. In the context of a military CQB moment, when you're in a stand-up situation, pulling guard, getting someone a guillotine or doing an arm bar or doing something where you've got to tie up both your blocking and striking tools is not the safest thing that you can do in that moment if you've got other choices, right? And so that's what we come back to, is where I realized in the moment, and this was my epiphany, which is a big fancy word for light bulb moment, where I was about to stop the class and go, I can't take this anymore. I realized that this guy, and this is where I figured out why his body language seemed like a growth mindset. Like, okay, I get it. He didn't even realize he was doing the guillotine because he wasn't thinking about this. Now, everyone listen carefully. He had done 20 years of the pre-contact cue. The move that sets up a guillotine to pull guard or a sprawl is when the guy changes elevation, he shoots into double leg you or to single leg you or tackle you. And so he had seen 20 years of elevation change, get ready for a guillotine, get ready to pull guard, get ready for to sprawl, right? And he had been doing spear for 4 days at that point. So he had, I'm going to make fun of the math, he had done, let's say, and we're doing like 50 or 100 reps a day on some stuff. But in terms of that scenario, he had done 3 reps of that scenario where he had done 30,000 reps of something else. It wasn't that he was going, I understand what Tony wants me to do, but I'm going to do something else. It was his brain hijacking what we think is muscle memory, but it's not. It's the myelinization and the neurotransmitter. It's called neuromuscular communication. And so if there's no awareness, there's no movement. If you're just standing there and you don't know there's any danger and somebody sucker punches are going to hit you, right? But if you looking at somebody going, man, I got a bad feeling from this guy, and you start to pick up those pre-contact cues, your body starts to get ready for danger. Now, the risk here, and this is where we come back when we say, careful what you practice, you might get really good at the wrong thing, is if you decided you're going to study boxing to learn how to protect from punches, the problem with that is all of your training, the years or hours that you do this, is spent in a conventional boxing stance. Your hands are up, your training partner's hands are up, but nobody stands like that in the street. And so
not unless you end up in a duel, in which case you probably didn't need to be there in the first place.
Right, and that's what I refer to as the douchebag fight, the fight that was just about ego and pride, and as you said, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. So it's a really fascinating thing. But I wanted to, crazy tangent. I just took a breath. It's been 15 minutes, but that story was a turning point, or that experience was a turning point, and a story that I've shared many times since to other coaches and trainers. When aside from working in military and law enforcement, I do a lot of work online and live with experienced coaches or coaches that want to take their understanding to the next level. Because even though I was researching all this stuff for decades, I still got caught in the trap of, why is he doing that? Right? So that is this integration of going, he doesn't know that he's doing it. He's gotten really good at the wrong thing for this scenario. If that was a jiu-jitsu match, that guy'd be tapping out. That was amazing. That was super fast and smooth, right? So a lot of interesting things there. So
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That actually segues nicely into something I wanted to mention to you. So a good percentage of the listenership of this podcast are very serious about their personal protection, and because of that, a lot of them are trainers. And given your extensive experience training law enforcement, military, etc., one topic that I think is worth exploring is the differences between training somebody existing training background versus training someone who doesn't. And I'd like to sort of pick your brain about what you prefer, whether you prefer to have a blank slate or you prefer to have someone who has some sort of combative skill grounding, and tips for both those scenarios, whether you're training someone who's fresh or training someone who comes in with 20 years of a martial art.
To be fair, that's such a loaded question, and I don't mean that you're trying to put me on the spot, but a lot of it is, and interesting. So we put together a one-day course called Be Your Own Bodyguard. and it was designed for the general public. And when I launched it in 2012, the fucking internet blew up. You know, MMA, jiu-jitsu, martial artist, Krav Maga, mocking the course, calling me a scam artist. It was very disappointing and very frustrating. And what I did is, you know, I've been researching violence for 40 years. And I sat one day and I said, can I make a one-day course that would make people safer? And I felt like I could. And I had in the past, you know, where someone would call me up and they go, hey, you know, I want you to work with me privately. What can you teach me? And so I kind of had the nuts and bolts of the program. Plus, you know, I've got, you know, at the time, over 30 years of doing all sorts of different seminars. And I went, what are the major, most important aspects? You know, and if you follow my work, you know, we've got this thing called the 3Ds: detect, diffuse, defend. And under detect and avoid, diffuse and de-escalate, and defend, and you know, when push comes to shove, be your own bodyguard. Under each one of those headings is a set of strategies and tactics and skills and drills. And I said, well, what are the essential ones there? And so I kind of said, well, this would be great, but this one is a must-have, right? And I looked through that, and I went, how long is this course? And what I did is how I explained it to people would be like, you know, you say to me, Joe, do you have any kids? Do you have any children?
Yeah. I've got 4 young girls.
Okay, how old's your oldest girl?
7.
7. Okay, too young as an example, but I've had this happen before where a parent who's trained with me says, okay, my daughter's like 18 now and she's going backpacking in Europe with a friend. I'm scared shitless. You know, she's not going to sign up for classes. You know, what could you do? And so I'd done things like that. And so I would take somebody who's kind of naive to danger of the world, naive to violence, isn't an athlete per se. You know, maybe they play some other sport. And I said, okay, look, here's some ideas about situational awareness. And this is the process. You know, we got to improve your situational awareness through getting you to think about self-awareness. It takes courage to walk. It takes courage to fight. It takes courage to pick up danger and then act on those pre-contact cues. Listen, every victim of violence who lived to tell the tale said they had a bad feeling before the attack, but none of them knew what to do with that feeling. And if you peel that onion, that's all fear. That's all fear. That's all it is. And so, so I put together this course that basically said, look, we improve your situational awareness. You're going to get a fear spike if you're near danger. You need to be able to manage your fear spike. You need to be able to manage your emotional state. So that would be the next block. That's all my research on fear management, the neural circuitry of fear, the whole cycle of behavior, and what evolved into our now No Fear program, which is spelled KNOW, no fear. And then there was functional movement. Just, you know, back in the day, it was much more technical, and now it's much more core to extremity, primal, gross motor, and really have it dialed in. And so I put this together, and that became the Be Your Own Bodyguard course. And everyone went nuts, because the unconscious bias of somebody is, if I said to you as an experienced judo jiu-jitsu guy, can you learn to defend yourself in a day? I would expect you to say, no fucking way, that's bullshit. Because what our brains do is we unconsciously go through okay, how long did it take me? Where am I in the pecking order, the totem pole? You know, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 7 years. I still get tapped out. I've been doing it for 7 years. One day, this is a bullshit course. You ask a boxer, he's going to go, no, I've been boxing for 10 years. I still get rocked. There's still people at the gym I don't want to fight. They're better than me, right? You ask a Taekwondo guy, he's been doing it for 7 years. He's a second-degree black belt. He's like, no, it took me 7 years to get here. What everyone's doing is they're running it through this filter of where they are and martial arts versus what the question is, could you learn to defend yourself in a day? So I started, and I thought I wrote a letter that also went viral. I went, listen, I can buy a fire extinguisher and learn how to put out a fire, but that doesn't make me a fireman. I can take a tactical first aid kit, learn how to put on a tourniquet, clear past the mouth breathing, learn some CPR, learn some mouth to mouth. I can save somebody's life, but that doesn't make me a paramedic and it doesn't make me a doctor. And so there's evidence in other fields where someone can spend half a day or a day and acquire life-saving skills. Why can't we do that in self-defense? And, I actually had in one of our last instructor courses, we do this 2-day weekend intensive. We had a guy who, passionate about martial arts, but his full-time career was a paramedic, EMS. And what he also did is he taught first aid, right? Stop the bleed, tourniquet, CPR, like all the.
Sure.
And I said, hey, what do you think? He says, this is fucking amazing. This will save people's and it actually is a testimonial on my website because I asked him, because I'm so frustrated about this and nobody can see my face and my body language, but I've taught thousand people over the years. We've got hundreds of affiliates around the world. Almost all of them are high-ranking, very experienced people who realize something was missing in either they didn't understand scenario design, they didn't understand the neural circuitry of fear, they didn't understand maybe Bob Willis, a very famous police researcher. He wrote a book with Gary Klugowitz over 20 years ago called the Tactical Edge. Every police department in the world has this book. It's encyclopedic. And Willis saw me teaching a course to cops in 1995, I think it was. And he comes up to me after, he says, you teach the 3 seconds before the fight everyone else teaches. And that always stuck. It's a testimonial that I share where I'm talking about those couple of seconds before everything starts moving, where you're going, what the fuck is going on? That holy shit moment, right? And if you think about it, if it's a slow burn, meaning is this slowly evolving and you can get your wits about you and you can, get your improvised weapon or escape route or adjust your stance or what have you, you're good to go. But the system that I designed is specifically built around sudden violence and how the reptilian brain, the amygdala, the limbic system, and all of those networks will hijack executive function and prefrontal cortex. And that's what triggers a startle flinch. But if we don't understand that or study that, that just makes, weathering the ambush even more difficult. So back to your question, who would I rather work with? It depends, right? And I've worked with everybody. My most fun course is the Be Your Own Bodyguard course, because I'm dealing with people who really don't believe this is even possible. And they leave there, and I tell them jokingly in the class, hey, you did this course. You realize that if you walk into a jiu-jitsu gym or a boxing gym or taekwondo or whatever, almost anybody there, if you spar with them, will tie you up or kick the shit out of you. This is not what this course is. This course is about choosing safety. This course is about manifesting courage. This course is about self-talk when your ego and pride is drawing you towards a more dangerous situation. And you remember something from the course, like, don't let ego or pride dictate your next strategy. Fucking, bite your tongue, turn around and walk away. And now if push comes to shove and it's a choiceless choice and you're really in danger, you've also done a bunch of drills, where you're using gross motor movement, not a complex motor skill, where it puts you back in the fight. And so I have a lot of joy, and it's emotionally gratifying working with people who know nothing, because the transformation in their competence and confidence is profound. I've also worked with, UFC champions where, you're there for 2 days and they're like, yeah, well, okay, whatever. And then you do you're trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat. I'm using a magician metaphor, right? Someone brings me into their camp.
Yeah.
And they're
already at 99% of their potential.
Right. But they're also so good. They're looking at you like you're Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse going, I thought you were taller, and they're like, you can go these guys want to fucking eat me. And then, and then you show them something like finger splayed outside 90 on how to break a clinch. And it's like a 2-minute exercise. And they're like, that's fucking cool, man. Right. And so, but all you've done is a micro adjustment I was watching a guy, he's a world champion in a very brutal martial art. And I was watching him practice his headbutts and elbows with his pad partner. And I just wanted to like change the angle of his forearm, like about a half an inch. That would have changed the pressure on his pad man representing, you know, his opponent, changed the pressure on the guy's neck, which would have changed his balance through his axis, just that half an inch, right? So if your thumb's in the wrong place by half an inch on a golf club, you're gonna fucking screw up your shot. If your pressure or your thumb is a half an inch off on your pistol and you're shooting, you're gonna cause malfunctions or miss your shot, right? Like slight changes in body position impact like the whole kinetic chain. And so we get deep into that anatomical stuff. So like that's the type of thing where sometimes working with really experienced people is really challenging and frustrating, because even if they have an open mind, it's got to go through the, yeah, well, I would do this and I would do that and I would do that. But then you sometimes will have somebody who's been doing shit for 20 years and goes, I just want to learn. Now I'll tell you, you know, I got a lot of friends who are, they've been in real gunfights, they've been in real violent encounters, and I'll be, let's say, on a military post, and they're like, hey, you want to go shoot? Do you want to go do some stuff? And I'm like, yeah. And they'll go, well, where are you? You know, in your skill set. And I said, pretend I don't know anything and just teach me like you would teach a friend. And so I've been shooting for years, but I never, ever, ever, not once, everybody listening here, I have never fucking ever once said, I'm pretty good, you know, man, show me something advanced, you know. It's always no, because I like a sponge, I'm looking for that 1% shift in my capacity, and that will change my potential.
Yeah, that's brilliant, man. Actually, one thing you said at the beginning of that spiel about the Be Your Own Bodyguard course that I really like, instead of thinking about this isn't possible, and I think that's something that as you said, that filter of martial arts is saying, well, yeah, it takes years and years and years to learn to defend yourself, because that's how the system's evolved. I mean, most of the martial arts systems that are popular now evolved at a time when you could start training your warriors at 10 years of age, and by the time they're 18, they're able to go to war. That isn't reality for most people. So rather than saying it's not possible to train someone in a day, it's more beneficial and useful to reframe the question and say, if it was possible, what would it look like? And
Right.
and I think that's sort of what you've accomplished there with the Be Your Own Bodyguard course. Is no, it's not. It doesn't replicate 10 years of training. But if we had a day, how far can we get them? Like, what's the maximal output we can get in a day? Because that's as much time as most average into their safety. So if that's the parameters we're working within, how do we get the most benefit out of that time period?
Yeah, it's very funny because I get, you know, we sent out a survey and I get testimonials. I did an interview with him, and he's a cop, a former military, became a cop. He walks in on a domestic call, and he's talking to the guy's mother, and all of a sudden this guy comes flying through a door and hits this guy. The cop's name is David Sachs, Sachs. If anyone wants to listen to the interview, Google "No Fear David Sachs," and he gets punched in the face 3 times, and he ends up like startle flinch. It came out of nowhere. He's talking to the guy's mom, and then all of a sudden, these two like French doors come flying open. Micro flinch. Boom, boom. He gets nailed in the face. Little skirmish. His hands come up to protect his head, right? And so what does he do? He does the move that we teach in the Be Your Own Bodyguard course. Now, what's important to understand is here's a guy who was in the military, who's now retired from the military, and becomes a cop, also martial artist, also CrossFitter. And what does he do in the ambush? He doesn't do wax on, wax off. He doesn't bob and weave. He doesn't pull guard. He flinches like a human will. And that's why we tell people, what unites everybody is physiology and fear. And you've got to get through that, manage your fear to get back in the fight. And then you want to be careful. Remember my maxim, careful what you practice. You might get really good at the wrong thing. Choose the safest thing to do there. So what he does is he converts the flinch and he drives the guy back with, we call it like our double palm strike, right? That push away danger, finger splayed outside 90, drives the guy back. The guy goes flying back. Guy's like over 200 pounds, goes flying. You got to hear him describe this on our podcast. And then he moves in to cuff him, and he gets hit again, and he sees this plume of blood shooting out of his arm, and he realizes he's not getting punched, he's getting stabbed. And the guy's got a knife in his hand. But it was happening so fast and so close, he never realized it. The hits to the face were lacerations. He also got, I think 2 or 3, I can't remember now, cuts in the back of his head when they were like in that clinch. And what he describes is this, and I saved the best part for the end. He took, it was a course we were doing through CrossFit, but it was still the basis, the formula for the Be Your Own Bodyguard course. So here's a guy that even though he was in the military, trained in combatives, as a cop, trained in defensive tactics, what saved him in the ambush was the biological airbag deploying and then the weaponization drills that we taught. And here's a guy trying to kill.
That's a great testimonial.
It's well, but here's the thing is like, so I come back to, like if I got a bunch of guys together and I said, hey, what's the most we can do in a day? Because that's all people have. Whoever's the head honcho might go, you know what, cardio, right? Cardio, it's stamina endurance. And now you got a day long, and you all know, everybody knows, you can't work out for a day and change your aerobic capacity.
Yeah, that's right.
That's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, you got to give them something that's got to filter through. Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing is, so we go, so let's say someone goes, I'm the best boxer in the room here, and I'll knock all of you out, and let's all spar. And if I knock you all out, then we agree that boxing is what they need to learn. And we come back to the reason why people who aren't open-minded don't like the message. And that is because the unconscious, operative word unconscious bias is the blind spot. The unconscious bias that says, this is bullshit, you can't do it, is the blind spot. My goal one day is to have every single martial arts school teaching the Be Your Own Bodyguard program. And then telling people, listen, the study of martial arts, it's like saying, I want to work out for half an hour versus I want to learn Olympic lifting. Olympic lifting is a sport, but it's also an art, and it's also a ton of technique, and you don't ever stop learning how to do a good snatch, right? Or clean, and so on and so forth. And I give this example that when you study, let's say, jiu-jitsu, and there's hundreds of moves, and there's a counter for every counter, and it's chest with muscles at 100 miles an hour. But when you watch a UFC, you don't see hundreds of moves. There's a couple of anomalies out there, some like amazing people, but even they are still submitting people with the 5 go-to moves: an arm bar, a rear strangle, an ankle lock, a knee bar. And some of those hardly ever happen, but most of the time it's dominating position, suffocating the person, and then most fights are finished with a triangle or a rear strangle. And so what you can do is you can say, well, what if I master those 5 instead of the 500? Well, then I could win MMA. And then if you look in the street, you'll see that same thing, because if the fight does go there, that's fine. But here's the thing. It's like your story, and I'm a huge jiu-jitsu fan. People think I'm not. And I've worked with, BJ Penn and Uriah Faber and Frank Mir and all, like guys that could, like, I wouldn't last a minute in, grappling with them or doing MMA with them, but they still respect and trust me. And I use this as a coach. I use this all the time. I go, like, for some reason, people, like, I'll have people go, well, I never saw you in the UFC. Why should I? I go, listen, you never saw Angelo Dundee fight either, but Muhammad Ali paid him for years to coach him and train him. Same with Sugar Ray Leonard, right? So, I'm a trainer, I'm a coach, and whatever I could do to protect myself or my family should be none of your business, because I'm not your fucking bodyguard. It's what can you do? And so I've spent 40 years studying the violence, and I would argue that if we just put out more of a that philosophical, what's our why, and let's think big. That the problem is, unless everybody in that group has insane self-awareness, they will always prioritize it based around what they can do, not what their students need to do. That's one of the slides in the beginning of our Train the Trainer course. Don't show your students what you can do, show them what they can do. And a lot of instructors make that mistake accidentally.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned earlier, they train the way they were trained, and growing up in the martial arts, I mean, the way most people recruited students was through demonstrations, and it was through look how awesome my instructor is, look at how many boards he can break, or look how intense the sparring is, or whatever. It really wasn't about the student; it was about that hero emulation. But when we're talking about preparing people for real violence, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't matter what you can do, because you're not going to be there. It's what can you get out of them.
It's a tricky thing. A friend of mine, Sean Mosen, who's a kettlebell wizard, but he's also very skilled in jiu-jitsu, and he does acrobatics, and also really strong, smart guy. But he did a meme once, talking about experts online and the internet. And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of, getting advice online is like asking a virgin for advice on sex. And there's a lot of people, and this is a tricky thing. There's a lot of people who are giving advice on self-defense who've never really experienced violence. And it's not something to brag about. And it's not, and even, there's I don't know if you remember some of the ads in the old day in Black Belt magazine, all the magazines, where, there'd be some guy who's got the best street fighting system in this world. And they'd say, this guy's been in like 600 street fights, and that's why you should learn from him. And I remember reading that going, listen, anyone who's been in 600 street fights, I don't want to teach me self-defense. That's not self-defense. And it's like when I work with protective service groups and bodyguards and stuff, the moment somebody telling me about the altercations they've been in, I go, okay, this guy's a loose cannon, or he's a bullshitter, or he has zero situational awareness, in which case he's a danger. Because if you've been in a bunch of car chases or ambushes, it means you don't understand your fucking job. The people that are the professionals, and so I look at it, I tell people here's the reframe. Would you sign up at a driving school where the advertisement was, our instructors have been in hundreds of car crashes and they'll teach you how to drive? Right? So
I love that. I've heard you say that before. And it's such a perfect reframe for that argument.
Well, and there's people that'll hate me for saying that because they bought off. And listen, I tell people like, listen, there's carpenters, there's handymen, and there's architects. When people train with us, we teach at an architectural level, meaning the architect of violence, the mental blueprint of violence, the blueprint of the whole scenario. What does the bad guy want? What does the good guy want? How does Maslow's hierarchy of your needs and survival fit into all of this? What's the relationship between physiology, physics, and psychology? How do we weaponize the startle flinch? How do we conduct realistic, relevant, and rigorous scenarios? And so I could go on and on and on with all that work. If you just go, if someone says, hey, can a boxer defend themselves in the street? Fuck yeah. But if you ask a boxer or a martial artist how much scenario work they do and how much psychology they do, and this isn't to put people on a spot. This is why, we got, close to 300 affiliates around the world. Most of them run martial arts schools. Why are they studying our shit? Because they want the best for their students, and they recognize, just like in anything, it's so weird how insular most of the martial art community is. I hate to say, where if people in business had that attitude, they wouldn't evolve. People in business are studying, they're going to mentorships, they're going to masterminds, they're going to certifications, they're always trying to get better because they're on a mission. And so Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And martial arts are like cars, and cars are like martial arts. You gravitate to the one that actually resonates with your personality. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And so what we do, because we live in a world where everyone compares and contrasts, we go, oh, look at that car, that's shitty, I don't like that car, I like this car, I don't like that martial art. And we get into the what made the Shaw brothers famous, right, is like, or Bruce Lee's famous line from Return of the Dragon, who can do karate better than Japanese, and then the guy kicks his ass. We've always had this political, bipartisan, like this like what martial arts better. And the reality is, it's like saying, what's better, like bicycling or swimming. And you're like, well, I don't even understand the question. And that's how, some people might go, well, that's a stupid example, because, all martial arts are about fighting, and to help people understand this, is I went like what's happening is, like, if somebody wants to do jujitsu or taekwondo or wushu or tai chi or aikido, and they want to do it because they want the cultural aspect, they want a new skill set, they like hanging out with these people, it resonates with their personality, then they should do that. The problem is when part of the reason they're doing that is for real world self-defense, and someone just says, yeah, of course you can use this in self-defense. Look, here's a picture in a magazine, of them doing, self-defense here. That's where I kind of like draw the line, and I go, okay, let's get serious here, and don't take my word for it. Use CCTV as the litmus test. And I tell people, it's not what we believe, it's what we see. And everyone has access to CCTV, and all I ask you to do is look at the qualification is it's got to be real violence. It can't be like a douchebag fight. And then go watch 1,000 real violent encounters, not fights, because most of them are, ego macho bullshit fights. And tell me how many times you see good, clean technique. And then you start to realize that when it's truly violent and there's real danger, that fear overrides our complex motor skills, and we need different systems at work to weather the ambush. And that's really the body of my work.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Tony, just to send us home, there's something that I wanted to sort of bring up with you. So I got into quote unquote reality-based / scenario-based self-defense around let's say about 2005. So that's been about 14 years for me now. By that time, you were already established as a pioneer in the field. So you'd be doing it for 25 years at that point. So during my whole time that I've been involved in this industry, you've been at the forefront of public opinion. So you've been to, there's probably two camps. There's people that absolutely love everything you do and recognize you as a legend in the field, and there's people that mock and revile, as you said, you talked about with that thing. So just to give you a bit of a platform, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about your work that you wish people understood better? Not saying to feed the haters, but for regular people that might be Googling Tony Blauer and seeing different opinions, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions, and what do you have in response to that?
Honestly, I think I answered that in a lot of detail already in the call. If I was going to kind of encapsulate or summarize that, is like, I am just an advocate for personal safety. I abhor violence, and people don't think that. I really abhor violence, which is why I study it. And I think that people look at me as just another martial arts style, and the SPEAR system, which SPEAR stands for Spontaneous Protection Enabling Accelerator Response, is the study of the startle flinch response and its potential for protective or tactical or combative movement. And so that's what I've been studying since the 80s, when I first stumbled on the startle flinch in the around 1987, 88. So I think people go and it's like the architect, handyman, carpenter metaphor. The handyman can do a bunch of things with a few tools. The carpenter's got more knowledge about how to build things, but the architect actually goes, don't build your house there. Can't you see this fault line here? You're gonna have to, change the foundation. And if you make this mistake right now, your paint's always going to have to get repaired because the movement is going to, impact the drywall, and you're always going to get cracks in the paint, right? Where the handyman has no clue, the carpenter would have no clue, but somebody's going, I wouldn't do that if I were you. That's the choose safety metaphor. So I'm not a martial arts style. I'm more of a researcher, scientist, architect. If that metaphor works for people, and I'm just trying to make people safer. I think that martial artists in general are like political parties and like religions, and so if you do something different, we also live in a I forget the buzzword going around where, like everyone's supposed to hate everybody if they don't agree with you. We're in that era of our civilization. So it's like, back in the 60s, Joe Louis, Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, Mike Stone, like my heroes, all used to get together and work out together and train together. Right. And in the 80s, this is before the internet, I was in Black Belt magazine in 1980. And so you would wait each month for the next issue to come out. And then if you wanted to write in, you couldn't email somebody. You had to write a letter. So I was like, I'd write things. Hey, I really like this. And I'd see guys that were doing cool things. And I wrote letters to 3 what would become reality-based self-defense instructors that were regularly doing things. I wrote 3 letters to all of them, and not one of them answered me back. And the letters were, hey, we're the Bruce Lee, Mike Stone, Chuck Norris of our era, our generation. And let's make the world safer together. Let's talk about our training ideas, maybe even if we can't get together. It was a really nice letter. I called all of them and left messages. Guess how many of them phoned me back? Again, 0. So something started to change. And so, to answer your question more directly, someone looking online and they see controversy, well, they only tackle the guy with the ball. So if you see controversy,
that's great.
Like, I don't know. And people go, oh, he's an arrogant. My favorite is people saying, oh, you're just a good marketer, right? I go, yeah, listen, I wish Instagram and Facebook and Twitter would blow up. I wish that I didn't have to even read or deal with it, but it's the way we communicate now. And I post shit every fucking day. And I try to make it as educational as possible. So if you're sitting on the fence, you're looking at stuff, don't ask somebody who's a hater, right? Don't ask somebody who don't ask we got like big issues here between Republicans and Democrats, right? In the States. Like, don't ask a Democrat what they think of a Republican, right? And it's like, don't ask somebody. And it's the same thing. Even if let's say you call up like I've got on my training team, my mobile training team, a girl named Katie Hurd, who is Krav Maga instructor of the year 2 years ago. Firearms, Krav Maga. I don't know if you know Combat Sports Academy, that's run by Kieran Fitzgibbon.
Yeah, I do.
Like one of the best fight gyms in the world. They got world champs, amazing gym. Katie runs their entire self-defense program. She's on my training team. We do seminars. That's what I'm talking about. Is there are people that go, holy shit, this makes our students safer. This makes us better. She still teaches Krav Maga. But she also teaches spear, and she also does our scenario work. And she also, because of her experience with us, she also runs behavioural and bodyguard seminars. Like, they all coexist perfectly, right? And so a lot of it comes down to what I said, the unconscious bias is the blind spot. And that all ties back to self-awareness. But, here's the thing, is if you ask somebody who doesn't like me what they think of the course or the principle, guess what they're going to tell you. But if you ask somebody who loves my shit, guess what they're going to tell you. And so the message here is don't ask anybody, do your own fucking research. Go read a bunch of articles, go watch a bunch of YouTube and Vimeo things, listen to my No Fear podcast and go, this guy's an asshole or this guy's onto something, and then make your own call. It's your fucking life.
That's perfect, man. All right. I'm very conscious of your time and appreciative of you giving up so much. Just before we wrap up, I just want to give a shout out for something you said just there about the Bruce Lees and the Mike Stones and the Chuck Norris of this generation. One of the things that I've identified since I started doing this podcast a year ago is that the people that have had longevity in this industry are often the most generous. And I say that because the first guest, actually, I created a bucket list of guests that I wanted to have on this show when I first started it, and one of the names on that bucket list was Rory Miller, and because I loved Rory's work, I loved his books, and I thought one day when this podcast is successful enough, I'm going to reach out to Rory Miller and maybe he'll come on the show. Rory was
I will. Sorry for interrupting, but I'll call him after and tell him to do your show.
Well, actually, Rory's already been on twice, so he was actually my second guest. I randomly sent him a message, and I thought I'll just see, and he was more than happy. He drove into town to get better Wi-Fi and did the podcast for me, which was amazing. And I've been really blessed to have some real legends that have, like yourself, who've just volunteered their time, who didn't want any sort of commercial upside. They just want to share the message and make people safer. And I think those that last in this industry are those that are prepared to do that, because their why is so much stronger than everything else. And those willing to do it just to educate more people and get more people safe are the ones that are going to really make the difference. So I've been incredibly blessed to have people donate their time to talk to someone on the other side of the world, mostly, who they probably haven't heard of before. I thank you for that, to be part of that group, and just for someone, if anyone wants to book you, wants to know more about you, wants to buy any of your stuff, where can I send them?
Well, if you're on Instagram, just go to @Tony Blauer, and there's a whole bunch of links in the bio. If you're on Facebook, @Tony Blauer and Spear System, of course, online, Blauer Spear, one word. And I do have, some affiliates in Australia, and we've got a mobile training team group there that does our Be Your Own Bodyguard and our PDRs around Australia. So if you want to host one or get involved or get a bunch of your trainers through it, you can contact me. We'll make that happen. I do want to, while you're mentioning names, 1990, shit, I can't remember if it was 93. I think it was 93. I came to Australia and I did my first, I've been coming there for years, but I met up with and have become good friends with Dean Lawler. And I don't know.
Yeah, I've trained with Dean.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Dean's a great guy.
So Dean is one of those pioneers. And if people, like in terms of understanding extreme close violence and knife fighting and weapon work, security work, you guys have some amazing talent in Australia. Dean's one of those guys. And if somebody's specifically looking for, in fact, we just did 2 seminars at his facility up in Brisbane last week. So, we'll be doing more stuff there, but, get on our mail list. If someone just goes to, and I'll send you the link to the stuff so you can put it in the show notes. But just get on my website, get on the mail list. And if you're an entrepreneur and proactive, then, organize a seminar. We'll make some shit happen.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Tony. I really do appreciate it. You've dumped a ton of knowledge, and I like the stream of consciousness approach. You never know what's going to come out. So I do appreciate that very much. And hopefully this is going to be the last episode of season 2. And I'd love to have you back again if you'd like to talk further. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of value out of this for all the listeners.
Yeah, no, I'd love to, if you've got a different theme or something specific, or you get a bunch of questions that we can, dive into and answer, I'd be more than happy to, get on next season. show at some point. And
Absolutely.
congrats on your work, man. I appreciate this, and I appreciate you reaching out to me and giving me the opportunity to share my story.
Excellent. All right, thanks so much, Tony. I'll put all those links in the show notes, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Take care, man. Be safe.
What a fantastic interview that was. If you did not get something out of that, you are either much smarter than me or you weren't paying attention. I really appreciate Coach Tony Blauer sharing his knowledge and experience. He's been doing this longer than just about anyone else still in the game. And man, his material is just so good, and he has such a depth of knowledge in this field. I really appreciate him spending the time to be interviewed and to give up his time to talk with me. All right, that is it for season 2 of the podcast. I know you're very, very sad, but here's the good news. We're not going to be gone for long. So last time we had a several-month break in between seasons, and that wasn't necessarily planned. It's just the way things sort of worked out and time commitments. And look, to be brutally honest, I mean, this podcast takes time. Finding guests, researching guests, recording the interviews, editing, uploading, it all takes time. And I'm a fairly busy guy. As you know, if you listen to this podcast, I've got a young family. I also work in a pretty demanding job, and I'm often traveling for that and presenting and lecturing and talking and consulting and training and doing all the things we talk about on the show. I do that for pay as well. So sometimes the unpaid love projects have to be put secondary to the jobs that bring in an income. I'd love to be able to do this full time and get paid for it, but at the moment that isn't the case. But that said, we will be back with season 3, and we're looking like a mid-October date for that. So around about the end of the second week of October, you can expect to see season 3 rolling out. The Managing Violence podcast will continue. I have guests lined up, several guests that I hope to get to during season 2. The recording schedule just didn't quite fit them in, but rest assured they will be here. I will be recording them. We've got guests from Australia, from the US, from South Africa, from the UK. Actually, you know what? Just to whet your appetite, here's some of the names that have agreed to be on the show in season 3. We have the founder of Senshido, Richard Dimitri. We have BJJ legend, founder of Straight Blast Gyms, Matt Thornton, who'll be talking about the sociological issues that are leading to an increase in antisocial behavior. If I hopefully can talk clearly by the time I chat to Matt, that would be fantastic. I've got a 3-part series with Dr. Gav Schneider, author of Can I See Your Hands? I have Australian martial arts pioneer Wayne Roy. I have Australian/Filipino edge weapons expert Ray Floro. I have youth development expert Ben Hamilton. I have a return of Professor Matt Larson, Director of Combatives from West Point Academy, and that's just some of them. Season 3 is going to be massive. Make sure you check it out. In the meantime, check out our social medias. We'll still be active on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. You'll find information about what's happening with the show. I'm going to be uploading a bunch of video and old episodes onto YouTube during the break. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And I will talk to you again very, very soon. In the meantime, as my friend Matt Larson would say, always be the warrior in the room. Thank you for listening to the Managing Violence podcast. For more information, to view previous episodes, or to read blogs, articles, and so much more, please check out my website at www.joesaunders.com.au. That's www.joesaunders.com.au. Thank you. Talk to you next time.